The year was 2247, and humanity had spread across 17 star systems in the galaxy. On the colony planet called New Atlanta, two security officers sat in their patrol car when a call came through their radio. Someone had reported a suspicious person near the Galactic Defense Research Center. The center was one of the most important military buildings on the planet, and nobody was allowed to go near it without special permission. Officer Kyle Morrison looked at his partner Lisa Green and nodded. They had been working together for 3 years and knew each other well. Kyle was a tall man with brown hair and a serious face. Lisa was shorter with blonde hair tied back in a tight bun. Both of them took their jobs very seriously because protecting people was important to them. They drove their patrol car through the busy streets of New Atlanta. The city looked beautiful with tall buildings that reached up into the sky. Flying cars moved above them and people walked on sidewalks that glowed with soft blue light. New Atlanta was known for being one of the most advanced colonies that humans had ever built. The weather was perfect today with clear skies and warm sunshine. When they arrived at the research center, they saw a man standing outside the main gates. He was a black man who looked to be in his middle years, maybe around 45 years old. His hair had some gray in it at the sides. He wore simple clothes, just a nice jacket and pants, nothing fancy. The man stood with his hands behind his back and seemed to be looking at the building very carefully. He did not look worried or nervous at all. Kyle got out of the car first and put his hand near his weapon, just in case. Lisa followed him and they both walked toward the man. The research center had big walls around it and signs everywhere that said, "No unauthorized people were allowed." According to their computer, nobody was supposed to visit the center today. That made this situation even more strange. The man saw them coming but did not move away. Instead, he smiled a little bit like he had been waiting for them. This made Kyle feel confused. Most people got nervous when security officers came to talk to them, but this man seemed completely calm and relaxed. Kyle spoke first in a firm voice. He said that this was a restricted area, and he needed to see the man's identification and authorization to be there. The man turned around slowly and looked at both officers. His movements were smooth and easy, not rushed at all. He had kind eyes and his face showed no fear. The man said good afternoon to them and commented that it was a beautiful day. His voice was deep and calm. Lisa looked at Kyle with a confused expression. Something felt different about this situation. The man's behavior was unusual. Normal people became worried when officers questioned them, especially near a military building. But this man acted like he was just taking a walk in the park. Kyle took another step closer but kept a safe distance between them. He asked again for identification and explained that the facility was off limits to people without clearance. If the man did not have permission to be there, he would have to leave immediately. The security of this building was very important and they could not take any chances. The man nodded his head slowly like he was thinking about what Kyle had said. He told them that he understood their concern and that they were just doing their job. But he said there might be a misunderstanding about the situation. His calm tone made Lisa feel even more confused. Why was he so relaxed? Lisa stepped forward and spoke in a polite but firm voice. She explained that this was a secured zone and unless he worked there or had special permission, he was breaking the law by being there. She also told him that they had received multiple complaints about someone matching his description standing in this area for over an hour. The man's eyebrows went up a little bit. He said that multiple complaints were interesting because he had only been standing there for about 15 minutes. Then he smiled again and said that time goes fast when you are looking at good architecture. He seemed to find the whole situation a bit funny. Kyle felt his patience starting to run out. The man's answers were too calm and too practiced. In his experience working as a security officer, people who acted this comfortable around law enforcement usually fell into two groups. Either they were criminals who knew the system very well, or they were people with powerful friends who thought rules did not apply to them. Neither option was good. Kyle's voice became harder and more serious. He told the man that he was not going to ask again. He needed to see identification right now, or they would have to detain him and take him in for questioning. This was not a game and they had a job to do. The safety of the research center was too important to ignore. The man let out a soft sigh, but there was no anger in it. He seemed to understand something that the officers did not. He told them very well, but warned them that this might make their day much more complicated than they expected. His words were strange and made both officers feel uneasy. The man reached slowly into his jacket pocket and made sure both officers could see his hand the whole time. Kyle and Lisa both tensed up and put their hands on their weapons. They had to be ready for anything. The man pulled out a small data chip, the kind that people used for high-security identification. He held it up between two fingers so they could see it clearly. He told them that if they scanned this chip, it should clear everything up. His voice was still calm and patient. He held the chip out toward Lisa, waiting for her to take it. Lisa pulled out her handheld scanner from her belt. This device could read any identification that was registered in human-controlled space. She took the chip from the man carefully and put it into her scanner, expecting to see a normal civilian identification or maybe a low-level contractor's pass. The scanner made one beep sound. Then it beeped again. Then it started making many fast beeping sounds that Lisa had never heard before in her 5 years working as a security officer. Her eyes got very wide as she looked at the screen. Information started flooding across the display faster than she could read it. There were classification levels that she did not even know existed, security clearances that seemed impossible, and at the very top of the screen was a name and title that made her feel cold all over. Lisa whispered something under her breath that she could not finish. Her face turned pale white, and she looked like she might drop the scanner. Kyle leaned over quickly to see what was wrong. When he saw the screen, his reaction was immediate and strong. All the color drained from his face, and he took a step backward without meaning to. His hand dropped away from his weapon like it had suddenly become too hot to touch. The identification on the screen read, Admiral Marcus Cole, Supreme Commander of the Galactic Defense Fleet, Special Authorization Level Omega Black, Direct Report to the United Human Council. Below that were dozens of medals, honors, and clearances that went on and on. This was not just any high-ranking officer. This was the highest-ranking military officer in all of human space. Kyle's mouth opened and closed several times, but no words came out at first. Finally, he managed to ask if this was really Admiral Cole. He said the name like he could not believe it was real. His voice cracked a little bit when he spoke. The man who they had been questioning, who they had threatened to arrest, was Admiral Marcus Cole. The actual Admiral Marcus Cole, the man. Marcus Cole gave them both a gentle smile that showed he understood how they felt. He said yes in the flesh, though he preferred to travel without his usual security team when he was doing unofficial inspections. He explained that having lots of guards around him made people act differently, and he wanted to see how things really worked. Lisa felt like her heart was going to beat right out of her chest. She knew who Admiral Marcus Cole was. Everyone in human space knew who he was. He was a living legend. 15 years ago, he had led humanity's fleet against the Kralthi invasion when millions of lives were at risk. The Kralthi were a hostile alien race that wanted to destroy human colonies. Admiral Cole had commanded the defense and won a victory that saved countless people. He was also the man who negotiated the peace treaty with the Zentari Collective, another alien civilization that had been at war with humanity. The negotiations had taken 2 years, but Admiral Cole had managed to find common ground and end the fighting. Now humans and Zentari lived peacefully, and even traded with each other. That peace had saved thousands of lives on both sides, and he was the hero of the Battle of Proxima Station. Lisa remembered learning about that battle in her training. A massive enemy force had attacked the station where over 2 million civilians lived. Admiral Cole had been outnumbered 3-1, but he made tactical decisions that turned the battle around. His strategies were so brilliant that they were now taught in every military academy across human space. He had saved all those people with his quick thinking and brave leadership, and Kyle and Lisa had just threatened to arrest him for standing outside a building. They had treated him like a common criminal. Lisa felt sick to her stomach. This was the worst mistake she had ever made in her entire career. She wanted the ground to open up and swallow her whole. Kyle's training finally kicked in even though he was in shock. He stood up straight with his spine very rigid and brought his hand up to his forehead in a sharp salute. His voice came out louder than he meant it to. He addressed Marcus as Admiral Cole and apologized over and over. He said they had no idea who he was and they were just responding to a call about suspicious activity. His words tumbled out fast as he tried to explain. Marcus raised his hand and waved it in a dismissive way, but his expression stayed kind. He told Kyle to relax and that he had nothing to apologize for. He explained that they were doing exactly what they should have been doing. Someone had called in a report about suspicious activity, and they had responded the right way. That was exactly the kind of careful attention that was needed to protect important facilities like this one. Lisa finally found her voice, even though it shook when she spoke. She asked Marcus why he had not just identified himself right away. They could have avoided this whole awkward situation if he had just shown them his identification at the start. She tried to keep her voice respectful, but she was confused and embarrassed. Marcus's expression became more serious, though his eyes still looked warm and understanding. He told them that this was not a situation that needed to be avoided. This was actually a test, and both of them had passed it very well. His words surprised both officers, and they looked at each other with confused faces. Kyle asked what he meant by a test. He could not understand why someone as important as the Supreme Commander of the Galactic Defense Fleet would waste time testing two regular security officers. There had to be more important things for him to do. Marcus nodded and gestured toward the research facility behind him with his hand. He explained that this facility was one of the most important buildings in all of human space. The work being done inside could determine the future of human defense for the next 100 years, but security was only as strong as its weakest part, and the weakest part was usually human judgment. He said the last part with emphasis. He started walking slowly, and both officers fell into step beside him without being asked. Their whole attitude had changed completely. Before they had been law enforcement officers doing their job. Now they were like students listening to a wise teacher. Everything about their body language showed respect and attention. Marcus continued talking as they walked. He told them that he had been doing random inspections at facilities all across New Atlanta for the past week. He arrived without any warning and without his usual security detail. Then he just watched and observed. He wanted to see how security people responded to unusual situations, and how they treated people who did not fit their expectations of who should be in certain places. Lisa felt a cold feeling growing in her stomach as she started to understand where Marcus was going with his explanation. She had a bad feeling about what he was going to say next. The way he spoke made it clear that he had discovered something troubling during his inspections, something that involved how people were being treated based on how they looked. Marcus stopped walking and turned around to face both officers directly. His face was serious now, but he still did not look angry or mean. He asked them if they knew how many times he had been stopped, questioned, or told to leave secure facilities in the past week. He paused for a moment to let the question sink in. Then he answered his own question. 12 times. He had been stopped 12 different times by security personnel who saw a black man in regular clothes near a government or military building and assumed he did not belong there. Kyle felt his face get hot with shame. He wanted to say something to defend himself and Lisa. He started to tell Marcus that race had nothing to do with why they stopped him. They were just doing their job and following procedures. They would have stopped anyone who was standing near the restricted facility. It was not about the color of his skin. Marcus held up his hand to stop Kyle from talking. He said he was not accusing them of anything bad. In fact, he said that Kyle and Lisa had handled the situation better than most of the other officers who had stopped him. They had been professional and polite the whole time. They had followed proper protocols exactly the way they were supposed to. They did not make assumptions about his character or his intentions. They simply asked for identification, which was the right thing to do. He paused again, and his eyes moved between the two officers. Then he said something that made them both feel uncomfortable. He told them the truth was difficult to hear, but it needed to be said. Out of those 12 times he was stopped, he was never stopped when he arrived in an official military vehicle. He was never stopped when he wore his uniform with all his medals and rank insignia. He was only stopped when he looked like an ordinary civilian, and more specifically, when he looked like a civilian who some people thought did not belong in nice neighborhoods or near important buildings. Lisa spoke up quietly. Her voice was small and she felt defensive. She reminded Marcus that they had responded to a call from someone else. They did not just decide on their own to stop him. Someone had reported suspicious activity, and it was their job to check it out. That was what they were trained to do. Marcus nodded like he expected this response. He asked them if they knew who had made that call to report him. His tone was gentle, but there was a point he was making. He told them it was a man named Greg Peterson, who worked as a middle manager in the administrative wing of the facility. Greg had worked there for 6 years. He had called security because, and Marcus quoted the exact words, There was a black guy who looked like he was checking out the building to rob it later. Marcus explained that he had been standing in a public area doing nothing unusual. He was just looking at the architecture of the building because he found it interesting. The words hung in the air, heavy and uncomfortable. Kyle felt many different emotions all at once. He felt angry at the situation. He felt embarrassed that he had been part of it. He felt deeply uncomfortable about what all of this meant. He had never thought of himself as someone who judged people by their appearance. He tried to treat everyone fairly, but now he was being told that he was part of a bigger problem. Marcus could see that both officers were struggling with what he had told them. His voice became softer and more like a teacher explaining something important. He said that the question was not whether bias existed, because it clearly did. The real question was how they, as a society, as a military and as law enforcement, could address the problem while still maintaining necessary security. That was the challenge they all faced. Marcus gestured for them to follow him as he walked toward a bench that overlooked a pretty plaza area. The research facility stood tall in the background, and its shiny walls reflected the afternoon sun. He sat down on the bench, and after hesitating for just a moment, both officers sat down next to him. This felt very strange to them. They were sitting casually with the most powerful military officer in human space, like they were old friends having a chat. Marcus told them that he had spent the last 5 years of his career working to reform security protocols across all of human space. He said this was not because he thought people were bad or evil. He knew that most people had good intentions. But he also knew that unconscious bias could create weak spots in security that enemies could take advantage of. That made it a military problem as well as a social problem. Lisa leaned forward because she was genuinely interested now. Her embarrassment was being replaced by curiosity. She asked Marcus how bias created security vulnerabilities. It seemed like two separate issues to her. Security was about keeping people safe, and bias was about unfair treatment. How did they connect? Marcus's face brightened a little bit, like a teacher whose student had asked an excellent question. He said she should think about it carefully. If security personnel were more likely to pay attention to people based on their appearance rather than their actual behavior, what would happen? Real threats would learn to take advantage of those assumptions. A person who was well-dressed and looked like they belonged could walk into places without being questioned. Meanwhile, harmless civilians who looked different would get stopped over and over again. He pulled out a tablet computer from inside his jacket and brought up a series of numbers and case studies on the screen. He told them about something that happened 3 years ago. There had been a major security breach at a military research station on a planet called Proxima 7. A spy had managed to steal classified information about new shield technology that humanity was developing. Marcus asked if they wanted to know how the spy had done it. Kyle nodded his head. He was completely fascinated now, despite still feeling bad about the earlier situation. He wanted to understand what Marcus was teaching them. Marcus explained that the spy was a clean-cut man who spoke well and matched everyone's idea of what a military contractor should look like. He wore nice suits and had perfect manners. His credentials were forged, but the forgeries were only on the surface level. They would not have held up under serious examination. But 3 different security checkpoints had waved him through without really checking, because he looked right. He looked like he belonged there. His appearance made people trust him automatically. Meanwhile, Marcus continued, there was an actual security consultant who had full authorization to be at that facility. She was a woman originally from Pakistan who had darker skin. She had all the proper credentials and clearances, but she was stopped and questioned at every single checkpoint. Every single one. The delays caused by stopping her over and over meant that her security audit was not completed on time. If it had been done on schedule, she might have caught the spy before he could steal the information. Lisa shook her head in disbelief. She could not understand how such a serious mistake had been allowed to happen. She asked how they did not learn from that incident. It seemed like such an obvious problem once Marcus explained it. Why had nobody fixed it? Marcus told her that they did learn from it. That incident was actually what started his push for new protocols. It was the catalyst that convinced the military leadership to let him reform security procedures. But he explained that changing systems was easy compared to changing how people think. You could write new rules and create new procedures, but if people still had the same unconscious assumptions, the same problems would keep happening. That was why he did these inspections personally. He wanted to see where the changes were working and where there was still work to do. He turned on his tablet and showed them graphs and statistics. The data showed that after the new protocols were put in place, security breaches had decreased by 40%. At the same time, complaints about unfair treatment had dropped by 60%. The numbers proved that fair treatment and good security went together. They were not opposing goals. In fact, they supported each other. Kyle looked at the data carefully. He had always believed that tough security meant being suspicious of everyone who looked out of place. But these numbers showed that approach actually made things less safe, not more safe. It was hard to change his thinking, but the evidence was right in front of him. Marcus stood up, and both officers immediately stood up with him out of respect. He told them that they actually gave him hope. His voice was warm and genuine. He explained that they had not made things worse unnecessarily. They had not made assumptions about his character. They had followed proper protocol, stayed professional, and treated him with respect even when they thought he was just a regular civilian trespassing. That was exactly what was needed from good security officers. Kyle still felt terrible even though Marcus was saying positive things. He admitted that he appreciated the kind words, but he still felt bad that Marcus had to go through this experience. It did not seem right that someone who had done so much for humanity should be stopped and questioned like a criminal. Marcus laughed softly. It was a kind laugh, not mocking. He told Kyle not to feel bad. This was a small inconvenience for him, but it was an important teaching moment. The goal was not to never question anyone or to abandon security protocols completely. That would be stupid and dangerous. The goal was to apply those protocols fairly and consistently no matter what someone looked like. Every person should be treated the same way. He tapped a few commands on his tablet computer. He told both officers that he was sending them a commendation for their professional conduct today. It would be added to their permanent files. Additionally, he wanted both of them to attend a training seminar he was conducting next month. The seminar was about advanced security protocols and awareness of bias. He said that officers like them were needed to help train the next generation of security personnel. Lisa's eyes got wide with surprise. She told Marcus that this was incredibly generous, but they were just doing their jobs. They did not deserve special recognition for doing what they were supposed to do anyway. She felt confused about why he was rewarding them when they had made him go through such an uncomfortable situation. Marcus smiled and said that was exactly the point. They were doing their jobs correctly. That deserved to be recognized and rewarded. Too often, he explained, people only noticed when things went wrong. Mistakes got all the attention. He made it a point to acknowledge when things went right. Good work should be celebrated so that people knew what success looked like. He pulled out 2 more data chips from his pocket and handed one to each officer. These chips contained all the details about the training program he had mentioned. They also had recommended reading materials about security reform and bias awareness. He told them that the work he was doing to change security culture across human space was ongoing. It was not something that would be finished quickly. He needed dedicated people at every level helping to make these changes happen. Kyle took the chip and held it carefully like it was something precious. He looked at Marcus and asked if he could ask a personal question. Marcus told him of course he could ask anything. Kyle wanted to know why Marcus himself was doing this work. He pointed out that Marcus was the supreme commander of the Galactic Defense Fleet. He was the most important military officer in all of human space. He could delegate this work to anyone. He could order other people to do these inspections. Why was he taking the time to do them himself? Marcus's expression became thoughtful and contemplative. For a moment, all the years of experience and responsibility showed on his face. He looked older and more tired. Then he spoke quietly and told them that he remembered what it was like to be on the other side of these interactions. He knew what it felt like to be the person being stopped and questioned. Marcus gestured for them to walk with him one more time. He led them toward the parking area where their patrol car was waiting. As they walked, he started telling them about his past. He said he had grown up on Earth in a city that used to be called Atlanta. This was before humans had colonized other planets. It was before the city became the model for New Atlanta where they stood now. He had been a kid with big dreams of joining the space fleet. He wanted to see the stars and serve humanity. He wanted to explore the galaxy and protect people. But he was also a black kid growing up in neighborhoods where he was often the only one who looked like him. His voice took on a distant quality, like he was watching old memories play out in his mind. He told them that he had been stopped by police 17 times before he turned 18 years old. 17 times. Not once because he had done anything wrong. Not once because he was breaking any law. Every single time it was because someone thought he looked suspicious or out of place. Sometimes he was just walking in his own neighborhood. Sometimes he was sitting in a park reading a book. Sometimes he was waiting at a bus stop to go to school. But someone always called the police, and the police always came to question him. Lisa felt a lump forming in her throat as she listened. She tried to imagine being a teenager and having that happen over and over. She tried to imagine how that would feel. To know that you had done nothing wrong but still be treated like a criminal. To have people look at you with suspicion just because of how you looked. It seemed cruel and unfair. Marcus continued his story. He said those experiences could have made him bitter and angry. They could have made him hate law enforcement. They could have driven him away from wanting to serve in any kind of uniform. Many people in his situation had given up on their dreams because of treatment like that. But instead, those experiences taught him something valuable. The people who stopped him were not monsters. They were not evil people who wanted to hurt him. Most of them were just doing what they had been trained to do. They were following patterns they had been taught to recognize. They were operating within a system that had serious flaws. He stopped walking when they reached the patrol car. He turned to face both Kyle and Lisa directly. His eyes were serious but also kind. He told them that when he joined the space fleet, he made a promise to himself. If he ever rose to a position of real authority, if he ever had the power to change things, he would work to fix those broken systems. Not by punishing good people who were doing their jobs, but by improving the systems that everyone operated within. He would make things better for the next generation. Marcus placed one hand on Kyle's shoulder and then put his other hand on Lisa's shoulder. He told them that was why he did this work personally, because every officer he met and every conversation he had was a chance to make things better. It was an opportunity to improve the system. He wanted to make sure that the next generation of kids with dreams of serving humanity would not face the same obstacles he had faced. They should be judged on their abilities and character, not on their appearance. Kyle stood up straighter. He felt a renewed sense of purpose growing inside him. He looked Marcus in the eye and promised that he and Lisa would do everything they could to be part of that change. They would not waste this opportunity. They would work hard to make the security system better and fairer for everyone. Marcus smiled with confidence. He said he knew they would keep that promise. That was why he was not just giving them a commendation. He was putting both of them on his watch list, and he clarified that it was the good kind of watch list. He saw leadership potential in both of them. If they continued on this path and kept working hard, he expected to see them rising through the ranks. Eventually, they would be in positions where they could implement these reforms at higher levels of authority. Lisa managed to smile, despite all the emotions she was feeling inside. She told Marcus that his words were incredibly motivating. She thanked him sincerely. She felt like this conversation had changed something fundamental in how she thought about her job. It was not just about enforcing rules anymore. It was about protecting people fairly and building a better society. Marcus pulled out one final data chip from his jacket pocket. This one looked different from the others. It had a special red stripe on it that indicated high-level security access. He handed it to Kyle and explained what it was. The chip contained his personal contact information, not his office number that went through secretaries and assistants. His actual personal contact. He told them that if they ever encountered situations where they thought bias was compromising security, they should contact him. If they saw opportunities for improvement that were not being addressed through normal channels, they should reach out to him directly. No bureaucracy, no red tape. Just straight communication between him and them. Kyle took the chip and stared at it in amazement. He could not believe that the Supreme Commander of the Galactic Defense Fleet was giving him personal contact information. This was unprecedented. This showed how seriously Marcus took this issue and how much he valued officers who were willing to do the right thing. Marcus stepped back and gave both of them a crisp military salute. His back was straight and his hand was sharp against his forehead. Kyle and Lisa immediately returned the salute with equal precision. Marcus told them to keep doing good work. He said that humanity needed people like them protecting everyone. People who understood that true security did not just come from strong defenses and powerful weapons. It came from strong principles and fair treatment. Security and justice had to work together. Marcus turned and walked toward a plain-looking vehicle in the parking lot. It was not a fancy military car. It was not marked with any insignia or flags. It looked like any normal civilian vehicle. That was intentional. He wanted to blend in and see how things really worked without all the special treatment that usually came with his rank. Kyle and Lisa stood beside their patrol car and watched Marcus walk away. The afternoon sun was getting lower in the sky and it cast long shadows across the plaza. The research facility continued its important work behind them. The scientists and engineers inside had no idea about the small but significant encounter that had just happened outside their gates. They were focused on developing new technologies that would protect humanity, but Marcus knew that technology alone was not enough. The people using that technology had to be fair and just. Lisa finally broke the silence. Her voice was barely above a whisper when she asked if that had really just happened. She felt like she was in a dream. The whole situation seemed surreal. They had started the day thinking it would be normal and routine. Now everything had changed. Kyle looked down at the data chip in his hand. Then he looked at his partner. He told her that yes, it really did happen, and their careers had just taken a very different direction than he had expected when they woke up this morning. This was not just another day at work anymore. This was the beginning of something new and important. They climbed back into their patrol car, but Kyle did not start the engine right away. He sat there thinking. Then he turned to Lisa with a serious expression on his face. He told her that they could not waste this opportunity. Admiral Cole had given them something important today. It was not just about career advancement or getting recognition. It was about responsibility. They had been given a responsibility to be better and to make the system better. They could not let him down. Lisa nodded her head firmly. Her expression showed determination. She agreed completely. She suggested that they should start by reviewing every procedure they followed. They should examine every assumption they made. They needed to figure out how they could be part of the solution instead of part of the problem. It would require honest self-examination, and that would not be easy or comfortable, but it was necessary. Kyle started the engine and they began driving away from the research facility. Neither of them noticed the small smile on Marcus Cole's face as he watched them leave from inside his vehicle. He had parked where he could observe them without being obvious. He pulled out his tablet and opened their personnel files. He typed a note that would be added to both of their records. The note said they had strong potential, were receptive to change, and he recommended them for the advanced leadership track. These small notes could change the entire trajectory of their careers. As Marcus drove away to his next inspection site, he thought about the bigger picture. In the grand scope of galactic politics and military operations, this encounter with two security officers might seem small and unimportant. The fate of billions of people rested on decisions made in government chambers and military command centers. Massive fleets of starships protected human colonies across 17 star systems. Scientists worked on technologies that could reshape civilization. Compared to all of that, one conversation with two officers seemed tiny, but Marcus knew better. He had learned through decades of experience that the future was not just built in the halls of power. It was not just created on the bridges of starships or in research laboratories. The future was built in moments like the one that had just happened. It was built through small changes and personal growth. It was built through the daily decisions of good people trying to do better than they did yesterday. Every interaction mattered. Every person mattered. Marcus had seen this truth proven over and over throughout his career. The Battle of Proxima Station, which had made him famous across human space, had been won not just by his tactical brilliance. It had been won because thousands of ordinary people had done their jobs with excellence. Engineers had kept the shields running when they should have failed. Medical personnel had saved lives under impossible conditions. Supply officers had found creative ways to keep ammunition and food flowing to where they were needed. Every single person had contributed to the victory. The peace treaty with the Zentari Collective had not been achieved just through his negotiation skills. It had been built through thousands of small interactions between humans and Zentari at every level. Traders who learned to trust each other. Soldiers who learned to see their former enemies as people with families and hopes and fears. Civilians who chose to give peace a chance instead of holding on to old hatreds. All of those individual choices had added up to something bigger. So Marcus continued doing these inspections even though some people thought it was beneath someone of his rank. He continued having these conversations even though they were uncomfortable. He continued working to build a better system even though the work was slow and frustrating. Because he knew that real change happened one person at a time, one interaction at a time, one choice at a time. His vehicle's navigation system beeped to let him know he was approaching his next destination. It was another military facility on the other side of the city. Marcus wondered what he would find there. Would the security officers treat him with suspicion like so many others had? Would they follow proper protocols? Would they be open to learning and growing? He would find out soon enough. Marcus thought about Kyle and Lisa as he drove. He had met hundreds of security officers during these inspections. Most of them were good people trying to do a difficult job. Some had reacted with defensiveness when confronted with uncomfortable truths about bias. Some had made excuses. Some had refused to acknowledge that there was even a problem. But Kyle and Lisa had listened. They had been willing to examine their own assumptions. They had shown genuine desire to improve. That was what gave him hope. The story of what happened today would spread quietly through the planetary security force over the next few weeks. Marcus had seen this pattern before. It would not spread as gossip or scandal. Instead, it would become a teaching moment, a reminder that their duty was to protect everyone equally and fairly, a reminder that the true measure of their service was not the power they had, but the wisdom with which they used that power. Other officers would hear about Kyle and Lisa's encounter with Admiral Cole, and it would make them think. Some would examine their own behavior more carefully. Some would question assumptions they had never questioned before. Some would attend the training seminars that Marcus offered. The change would be gradual and uneven. There would be setbacks and resistance, but slowly, steadily things would improve. That was how real progress happened in the real world. Marcus pulled into the parking lot of the next facility and turned off his vehicle. He sat there for a moment, gathering his thoughts. This job was exhausting in ways that commanding a fleet in battle had never been. In battle, the enemies were clear and the objectives were obvious. You either won or lost. But this work of changing hearts and minds and systems was much more ambiguous. Progress was hard to measure. Success was incremental and often invisible. You could work for years and still feel like nothing was changing. But then Marcus would meet people like Kyle and Lisa, people who got it. People who were willing to do the hard work of examining themselves and growing. Those encounters recharged his determination. They reminded him why this work mattered. They gave him hope that maybe, just maybe, the future really could be better than the past. Marcus got out of his vehicle and walked toward the facility. This one was a communications hub that coordinated military transmissions across 3 star systems. It was critically important infrastructure. He walked up to the main entrance with his hands in his pockets and his posture relaxed. Within minutes, he expected security would approach him. The test would begin again. Meanwhile, back at the planetary security headquarters, Kyle and Lisa were filling out their report about the day's events. Kyle struggled with how to word it. How do you write a report that says you stopped and questioned the Supreme Commander of the Galactic Defense Fleet? How do you explain that you threatened to arrest the most important military officer in human space? It felt humiliating to write it all down. Lisa noticed Kyle staring at the blank report form. She understood his struggle because she felt the same way. She suggested that they should just write exactly what happened without trying to make it sound better or worse. The truth was the truth. They had done their jobs according to protocol. Admiral Cole himself had said they handled it well. There was no point in being ashamed of doing the right thing. Kyle nodded and started typing. He described the call they received about suspicious activity. He described approaching the subject and requesting identification. He described the subject's calm demeanor and eventual revelation of his identity. He described the conversation that followed. When he finished, he read it over. It sounded professional and factual. It also sounded like a career-ending disaster, but Lisa was right. The truth was the truth. They submitted their reports and waited nervously. Within an hour, they were called to their supervisor's office. Commander Helen Brooks was a stern woman with 30 years of experience in security work. She did not tolerate mistakes or excuses. Kyle and Lisa walked into her office expecting the worst. They expected to be reprimanded or suspended or maybe even fired. But Commander Brooks was smiling when they entered. She gestured for them to sit down and told them that she had just received a communication directly from Admiral Cole's office. The admiral had sent formal commendations for both of them, along with a detailed explanation of why he thought they deserved recognition. Commander Brooks said she had been in security for 3 decades and she had never seen anything like this. She seemed genuinely impressed. She told them that Admiral Cole's work on security reform was important and that the Planetary Security Force was fully supportive of his efforts. She said she was proud to have officers on her team who represented the force so well. She informed them that they would both receive the commendations in their files, and they would be given priority consideration for advancement opportunities. She also told them to attend Admiral Cole's training seminar next month and to learn everything they could. Kyle and Lisa left Commander Brooks's office feeling stunned. What they had thought would be the worst day of their careers was turning into one of the best. They went to the break room and sat down with cups of coffee. Other officers came by to ask what had happened. Word had already started to spread through the headquarters that something unusual had occurred. At first, Kyle and Lisa were reluctant to talk about it. It felt private somehow. But then they realized that Admiral Cole had probably wanted this to become known. He wanted it to be a teaching moment for everyone. So they told the story to their colleagues. They explained what happened and what Admiral Cole had taught them. They talked about bias and security and fairness. Some officers listened with interest. Some seemed uncomfortable. Some argued that security required being suspicious of certain types of people. But the conversation had started, and that was what mattered. Over the next few days, Kyle and Lisa found themselves thinking differently about their work. When they responded to calls, they paid more attention to their own reactions and assumptions. When they saw someone who looked out of place, they asked themselves why that person looked out of place. Was it actually their behavior, or was it just their appearance? They started to notice patterns in their own thinking that they had never recognized before. It was uncomfortable, but also enlightening. Lisa started reading the materials that Admiral Cole had given them. The research papers and case studies were fascinating. She learned about implicit bias and how it affected decision-making, even in people who consciously believed in equality. She learned about studies showing that security screening that relied on behavioral indicators rather than appearance profiling was actually more effective at catching real threats. The evidence was overwhelming once you looked at it objectively. Kyle attended a community meeting in his neighborhood one evening. A group of young people, mostly minorities, were talking about their experiences with law enforcement. Kyle had never gone to one of these meetings before. He had always thought they were just complaint sessions where people whined about getting in trouble. But after his conversation with Admiral Cole, he wanted to understand their perspective better. What Kyle heard at the meeting shocked him. Young people described being stopped multiple times per month for doing nothing wrong. They described being treated with suspicion in their own neighborhoods. They described feeling like they could never relax because they always had to be careful about how they appeared to others. These were good kids with jobs and school and families. They were not criminals, but they were treated like potential threats just because of how they looked. One young man named Carlos stood up and talked about his experience. He was studying engineering at the university and working part-time at a tech company. He had been stopped by security officers 8 times in the past year. Once he was stopped while going into the building where he worked. The security guard did not believe he actually worked there even though he had his identification badge. Carlos had to call his supervisor to come down and verify his identity before they would let him enter. He had felt humiliated and angry. Kyle listened to story after story like this. He started to understand what Admiral Cole had been talking about. These were not isolated incidents. This was a pattern. And the pattern caused real harm to real people. It created a society where some people felt safe and welcomed, while others felt constantly scrutinized and suspected. That was not the kind of society that humanity should be building among the stars. After the meeting, Kyle introduced himself to Carlos and apologized for how he had been treated. He explained that he was a security officer who was trying to do better. Carlos was surprised but appreciative. They talked for over an hour about how security could be improved. Carlos had thoughtful ideas about training and procedures. Kyle took notes and promised to bring these suggestions to his supervisors. It was a beginning. The next month, Kyle and Lisa attended Admiral Cole's training seminar along with about 50 other security and military personnel from across New Atlanta. The seminar lasted 3 days and covered everything from the psychology of bias to practical techniques for fair and effective security screening. Marcus himself led most of the sessions. He was an engaging teacher who used real examples and encouraged honest discussion. During one session, Marcus asked everyone to share a time when they had been wrong about someone based on first impressions. The room was quiet at first. Nobody wanted to admit mistakes. But then one officer spoke up. Then another. Then another. Soon people were sharing stories and the conversation became energetic and meaningful. Everyone had examples of times when their assumptions had been incorrect. That was the point. Everyone had biases. The question was whether you acknowledged them and tried to compensate for them. Marcus divided them into small groups for practical exercises. They watched videos of various situations and had to decide what actions they would take. Then they discussed why they made those decisions. The discussions revealed how differently people perceived the same situations based on their own backgrounds and assumptions. It was eye-opening for everyone involved. On the final day of the seminar, Marcus gave a speech that Kyle would remember for the rest of his life. Marcus stood at the front of the room and talked about his vision for humanity's future. He said that humans had spread across the stars and achieved incredible things. They had built cities on distant planets. They had made peace with alien civilizations. They had created technologies that seemed like magic. But all of those achievements would be hollow if humans could not treat each other with fairness and dignity. Marcus said that humanity's greatest strength was its diversity. Humans came in every color and culture and background. That diversity of perspectives and experiences made human civilization rich and vibrant. But diversity only worked if everyone was valued equally. If some people were treated as less than others, that strength became a weakness. Division and resentment would undermine everything humans were trying to build. He said that each person in that room had the power to make things better. They were the ones on the front lines of security. They were the ones who interacted with civilians every day. Their choices and behaviors would shape how people experienced their society. Would people feel safe and protected by security forces? Or would they feel threatened and oppressed? That outcome depended on the daily decisions of officers like the ones in this room. Marcus concluded by saying that he had faith in humanity's ability to do better. He had seen people change and grow throughout his long career. He had seen societies become more just even when it seemed impossible. Progress was always possible if people were willing to do the hard work required. He thanked everyone for attending the seminar and encouraged them to keep learning and growing. After the seminar ended, many attendees came up to speak with Marcus personally. Kyle and Lisa waited in line for their turn. When they finally reached him, Marcus greeted them warmly like old friends. He asked how they had been doing since their encounter outside the research facility. They told him about the changes they had been making in their own work and about the community meeting Kyle had attended. Marcus was pleased to hear about their progress. He told them they were exactly the kind of leaders that the security forces needed. He encouraged them to keep pushing for change even when it was difficult. He reminded them that they could always contact him if they needed support or guidance. Then he shook their hands and moved on to speak with other attendees. As Kyle and Lisa walked out of the seminar building, they felt different than they had felt a month ago. They had a clearer sense of purpose now. They understood that their work was about more than just enforcing rules. It was about building the kind of society where everyone could thrive. It was about protecting people in ways that were fair and just. That was a mission worth dedicating their careers to. Over the following months and years, Kyle and Lisa became advocates for security reform within their organization. They helped develop new training programs based on what they had learned from Marcus. They mentored younger officers and taught them about fair and effective security practices. They worked with community groups to build better relationships between security forces and the people they served. It was not always easy, and there was resistance from some who thought the old ways were good enough. But Kyle and Lisa persisted because they knew the work was important. Marcus continued his inspections and training seminars across human space. He visited colonies on distant worlds and stations orbiting alien stars. Everywhere he went, he had conversations like the one he had with Kyle and Lisa. Some bore fruit immediately, while others planted seeds that would take years to grow. But slowly and steadily, human security culture began to change. It became more focused on behavior rather than appearance. It became more aware of bias and more committed to fairness. The galaxy remained a dangerous place with threats from hostile aliens and human criminals and natural disasters. Security was always necessary, But humanity learned that security and justice did not have to be opposing values. In fact, the strongest security came when all people felt equally protected and valued. When everyone had a stake in society, everyone worked to defend it. That was the lesson that Marcus Cole spent his career teaching, and the lesson that officers like Kyle and Lisa carried forward into their own work. And somewhere across the vast expanse of space, on ships and stations and colonies across 17 star systems, other encounters were happening. Other officers were having their assumptions challenged. Other young people were seeing that change was possible. The work was ongoing and would never be truly finished. But the direction was clear, and the momentum was building toward a future where humanity lived up to its highest ideals among the stars.